Hello, and welcome to the Unit 3 mini lesson, which concerns the writing of paragraphs. Your assignment this week is to write a 3-paragraph essay. But what is a paragraph? Of course, we can all recognize what a paragraph looks like. It is a block of text that is set off from the rest of a piece of writing by an indentation at the beginning and a line stop at the end. But what is the anatomy of a paragraph? How does a writer know when to end one paragraph and start a new one? What should a paragraph contain in order to fulfill its job? How do paragraphs begin, develop, and end? Every paragraph answers these questions in its own way, depending on the style of writing and the author's purpose. But in academic writing, the same overall structure that applies to a full-length piece of writing applies to every individual paragraph. Like any academic essay, the ideal paragraph has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. If you can master this formula, you have the recipe for making the bricks of writing. And once you know how to make the bricks, you can stack them to build an essay, a book, a series of books, or anything else that you can imagine. Step 1. The topic sentence. As you have learned in previous English classes, the first sentence of a paragraph should be the topic sentence. This is like the thesis of your paragraph, and it exerts a controlling influence on everything else that happens in the paragraph. The best way to identify topic sentences for your essay is to draw up a brief outline of your essay as a whole. I am writing a paper with the thesis that Eveline's decision to stay in Dublin is heavily influenced by her religious upbringing. Why do I think this? I have found 3 clues. At the beginning of the story, the promise is made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque. This sounds to me like it's similar to the promise at the end of the story that Eveline makes to her mom, and so it sounds important. So I'm just going to give it its paragraph without really thinking specifically about how I'm going to make that argument. The second paragraph, I think I'm going to say something about how Harry's in the church decorating business. It's interesting that her brother's path also led him to follow a path of life that gravitated toward a religious calling. Again, I think I'll work that out more when I get into the nitty-gritty of that paragraph. And then the third part of my essay, at the very end of the story, Eveline prays to God to direct her at the critical moment. So that obviously sounds like an important piece of my thesis. So these clues are distributed over the story in a fairly even way, so that the first clue is from the beginning of the story, the second clue is from the middle of the story, and the third one is from the end. It is easy to see the outline of my paper will cover each of these points in 3 consecutive paragraphs. After I get my introduction out of the way, I can tackle my first body paragraph. The job of my topic sentence will simply be to introduce the topic of the paragraph, the print of the promises made to the Blessed Mary Alacoque. So this is going to be my topic sentence for my first paragraph, the paragraph that I'm going to practice writing for this mini lesson. As Eveline looks around her room at the beginning of Joyce's story, one of the most prominent items she notices is the colored print of the promises made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque. So I got my topic sentence. Step 2 is discovering the proofs. With this topic sentence, my paragraph has its marching orders. I need to explain how the appearance of this detail in the story advances the thesis of my essay about how religion influences Eveline. I have a general sense that there is a connection here, and now, as I write this paragraph, I can try to tease out the exact nature of this connection. After I write my topic sentence, I will take some time to brainstorm answers to the question of why this print is significant to my thesis. I start off with my first one. The promises made to the Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque echo the promise Eveline made to her mom, which I said already. But there are a few other points that I can think of as well. The Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque represents a rare example of a positive female role model for Eveline. Okay, here's another one. The print of the Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque shows that Eveline lives in a religious home. That sounds important. And finally, the promises themselves assert that devotion to Jesus will result in peace and redemption. Okay, so I think that's going to play a role at some point too. So now I have 4 solid proofs to back up my thesis. What's going to be Step 3, ordering your points. These 4 points are definitely enough to give me a full paragraph. The next question is how to order them in the most effective way. There is no hard and fast rule, but a good strategy is to start off with the most general point and work up toward the most specific point. Also, Consider starting off with the point that you find least important or least convincing, and move up to the one you find most important or most convincing. You can also consider the way the story itself is organized so that your comments follow the chronology of the narrative. Working with these three considerations, I would arrive at the following order. 1, it shows that Eveline lives in a religious home. This is very convincing and very general. It doesn't say anything very specific. It just makes a broad point about Eveline's background. The second point, the Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque represents a rare example of a positive female role model for Eveline. This is mildly convincing, and it's pretty general. Again, it kind of just talks about the general background that Eveline is coming out of. Number 3, the promises themselves assert that devotion to Jesus will result in peace and redemption. This is kind of a little more convincing because it goes a little more deeper into this specific image. And it's pretty specific because it gets into details about Eveline's situation. And finally, number 4, this is the last one I'm going to put in my list here. The promises made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque echo the promise Eveline makes to her mom. This is very convincing to me. And it's very specific because it makes this very specific connection between the word promises that appears at the beginning of the story in relation to this colored print and the promise that plays such an important role at the end of the story. Step 4 is going to involve writing each of these points out into sentences. Now that I have all the points I want to make listed in the order I want to make them in, the next phase is simply a matter of connecting the dots. As you go through your supporting points, you can knock off the less significant points in a single sentence. So first point, not very significant. It shows that Eveline lives in a religious home. So here's my sentence. This print, along with the portrait of the priest, demonstrates the extent to which Eveline's home life is crowded with Catholic imagery. So the next point is also kind of a minor general point. The Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque represents a rare example of a positive female role model for Eveline. Translate into a sentence. Sounds something like this. Moreover, the strong female presence represented by the figure of this saint provides one of the few instances in Eveline's world of a strong female role model, a woman who has achieved status and self-sufficiency through her devotion to the Catholic faith. Continuing with step 4, we're going to take the next 2 points and write them out into sentences, but these points are a little less obvious. They're going to require a little more explanation. So perhaps I will devote 2 or 3 sentences to these more complicated, less obvious points. So my third point was that the promises themselves assert the devotion to Jesus will result in peace and redemption. So what do I mean by that? Well, I actually want to explain a little bit about what the promises are and how they relate to Eveline's home life. So this is the pair of sentences that I wrote up to explain this. Although they are not itemized in the text of the story, the promises made by Jesus to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque emphasize domestic tranquility, consolation in the face of bereavement, and refuge in the face of death. Considering Eveline's turbulent home life, the grief she has experienced from the death of her loved ones, and the concerns about her own mortality indicated by her preoccupation with the dust in her home, these promises would certainly exert a unique appeal for Eveline as she seeks an answer to the question of what she should do with her life. And then finally, probably my most complicated and most important point is my last one, that the promises made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque echo the promise Eveline made to her mom. And so this is my explanation of that point. Most importantly, the promises made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque foreshadow the promise that Eveline remembers making to her mother to, quote, keep the family together for as long as she could, end quote. The appearance of the print of Jesus' promises to St. Margaret Mary suggests the sacred bond associated with promises in general in Eveline's mind, conferring a religious significance to the promise that Eveline made to her dying mother. For Eveline to renege on her vow would be tantamount to Jesus welching on his promise to St. Margaret Mary, lending a cosmic significance and a sense of supreme obligation to Eveline's pledge. Step 5 involves wrapping up the paragraph. The last piece of an effective paragraph is the closing remark, a sentence that serves to sum up the main point of the paragraph in a way that clarifies to the reader what the main point of the paragraph has been. The easiest formula for this closing remark sentence is to connect the main point of the paragraph with the thesis statement of your essay. For instance, Although it seems like a minor detail, the print of the promises made to Margaret Mary Alacoque provides insight into the manner in which Eveline's religious upbringing influences her decision to remain in Dublin and to follow through on her promise to her mother. As you can see, this basically repeats what I said in the paragraph, connects it directly back to the thesis statement, and provides a sense of closure for the paragraph as a whole. When we put it all together, we see that we have turned a vague idea about the significance of this tiny narrative detail in Joyce's story into a very respectable series of insights that work together to convince the reader of the significance of this colored print. And in this paragraph, as it's written out here, each colored segment represents a new stage in the development of this paragraph. So I'll just read the whole thing. As Eveline looks around her room at the beginning of Joyce's story, one of the most prominent items she notices is the colored print of the promises made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque. This print, along with a portrait of the priest, demonstrates the extent to which Eveline's home life is crowded with Catholic imagery. Moreover, the strong female presence represented by the figure of the saint provides one of the few instances in Eveline's world of a strong female role model, a woman who has achieved status and self-sufficiency through her devotion to her Catholic faith. Although they are not itemized in the text of the story, the promises made by Jesus to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque emphasize domestic tranquility, consolation in the face of bereavement, and refuge in the face of death. Considering Eveline's turbulent home life, the grief she has experienced from the death of her loved ones, and the concerns about her own mortality indicated by her preoccupation with the dust in her home, these promises would certainly exert a unique appeal for Eveline as she seeks an answer to the question of what she should do with her life. Most importantly, the promises made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque foreshadow the promise that Eveline remembers making to her mother to keep the family together for as long as she could. The appearance of the print of Jesus' promises to St. Margaret Mary suggests the sacred bond associated with promises in general in Eveline's mind, conferring a religious significance to the promise that Eveline made to her dying mother. For Eveline to renege on her vow would be tantamount to Jesus welching on the promise that he made to St. Margaret Mary, lending a cosmic significance and a sense of supreme obligation to Eveline's pledge. Although it seems like a minor detail, the print of the promises made to Margaret Mary Alacoque provides insight into the manner in which Eveline's religious upbringing influences her decision to remain in Dublin and to follow through on her promise to her mother. The sixth and final step is to include any in-text citations. Remember to insert in-text citations for any quotes from the story, as well as for any other sources you refer to in the paragraph. For example, in this paragraph, we have 2 quotations from the story that we want to make sure we have page numbers for. And I also consulted another source, catholicculture.org, to learn more about the promises made to the Blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque, so I'm going to include that source as well. Following this basic strategy for all of your body paragraphs will allow you to bring together large amounts of information into a focused discussion, and it will take a lot of the guesswork out of the process of writing paragraphs.